We've got a great show coming up for you on American Black Journal. We'll take a look at the state of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the corporate space. More than 2 years after the murder of George Floyd ignited efforts to address the gaps. Plus, we'll get the details on a new fund that'll help minority developers in Detroit grow their businesses. Don't go away. American Black Journal starts right now.
From Delta Faucets to Behr Paint, Masco Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. Masco, serving Michigan communities since 1929. Support also provided by the Cynthia and Edsel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV.
The DTE Foundation proudly supports 50 years of American Black Journal in covering African American history, culture, and politics. The DTE Foundation and American Black Journal partners in presenting African American perspectives about our communities and in our world.
Also brought to you by Nissan Foundation and viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to American Black Journal. I'm Stephen Henderson. The murder of George Floyd in May 2020 prompted a lot of corporations and organizations to strengthen their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Many created chief diversity officer positions to oversee the efforts to better reflect the diverse community. But where do we stand today, more than 2 years later? I sat down with marketing consultant Mark Lee of the Lee Group and Nikki Pardo of Global Alliance Solutions to get an update on the DEI progress. So Mark, I'm going to start with you. We've had this conversation a couple times, right? Right after the murder of George Floyd and the protests, you had these corporations come out and say, hey, we get it. We got to do better. We need to focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion. We talked about a year ago, I think, about where we were. We still, I think, have some frustration about what the actual response has been by these corporations. They've said they want to do a lot, but brick and mortar, there isn't as much as we might expect.
I think that's a very accurate statement. Let's just circle back 2 years ago, if you could, for a quick moment. Obviously, after the George Floyd situation, we saw a huge increase in commitment statements, and people were making that verbal commitment, if you will, to hiring DEI professionals at that point in time. Let's fast forward to today, and it's very mixed results. It's actually somewhat frustrating in terms of the progress today. Let me just give you a specific data point here. Recently, a survey was done by the Creative Investment Research of the 271 U.S. companies or corporations that made DEI pledges. Now, financially, since that racial injustice, if you were a couple of years ago, since the summer of 2020, these corporations estimated to pledge some $67 billion, estimated to pledge $67 billion behind DEI. Through the beginning of this year, only $652 million have actually been spent. That's less than 1%. And that's part of the frustration that we're seeing. There was a lot of gung-ho excitement and commitment to it, but when you put the dollars to the metal, so to speak, those dollars are not coming through.
And Nikki, one of the things that's also happening is that people are finding themselves in these roles in corporations and finding that maybe they're not all that they're chalked up to be, and they're leaving. Talk about some of the frustrations that are associated with just the idea of introducing these positions and these ideas into a corporate space that, let's be honest, is just not used to it.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I belong to two large, like national organization, or not, it's kind of an informal group of DEI practitioners. And I also facilitate one myself. And Mark has spoken twice, and that he was a hit. And, because he will give it to you. He comes with that data and he gives it to you raw, leads with stats. But I'll tell you what's happening now is we saw the trend of the bandwagoning post May 25th, 2020, when the world stopped spinning on its axis for 10 minutes. And so these businesses, these organizations across all industries were clamoring and with these chief diversity officers, CDO positions. And so now we've revisited, here we are 2 years later, and the feedback from my fellow practitioners in these groups they are very frustrated. And I'm not going to use an absolute and say all. Some have made tremendous strides and really moved that needle, but others are really frustrated and feel that they were set up to fail, where they have no budgets. So that means no professional development. And everyone knows that this industry, I've been in it now collectively for 17 years, that is one of the fastest evolving industries. So you have to keep up with trends. So that means you have to, get certifications or join, organizations and with like-minded. So yeah, that's where they are right now. And in the beginning, I remember when I was having conversations with them, I'm like, why the dashes and the slashes? Like it would be CDO / talent acquisition / account manager, I remember just getting not angry, but just, I was questioning it. Now they're grateful for it because now that the whole wave has kind of calmed down, they're able to return back to their, TA positions or their accounting positions or their marketing positions or whatever it was. And I always said in the beginning, like I called it the tap on the shoulder. Like if you were Black, if you were a woman, especially a middle-aged woman, and expressed an interest, it's like, hey, you're our new CDO. And we saw that. And Mark, you could testify to this also because you have friends who this has also happened to. So now the wave has kind of stopped and they're going to their respective corners, and that's the way the trend is going.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's really disappointing. Mark, is this about a commitment that was harder to fulfill than these corporations thought it would be? Or is this about, I guess, a head fake of sorts that they said they were interested and turned out they weren't as interested?
I think this is an issue with people overly excited. I put that in quotes, meaning that we have to do something, we have to do something, we have to do something without properly planning for it. And it was almost a knee-jerk reaction to what happened in May of 20. And what Nikki is saying is spot on. A lot of people who were brought into these organizations, and I'm just generalizing right now, okay, just generalizing. Some people quite candidly were not prepared to take these positions. And so what the organizations were doing, there was a knee-jerk reaction. They brought them in. And then when the people came in, to Nikki's point, there was a lot of frustration. The average tenure of a person coming into it has declined from 3.1 years in that position to 1.8 years in less than a 2-year window. So think about that. So bottom line, it was a knee-jerk reaction, I think. And as a result of that, there was not a proper planning. And what we're seeing right now is a direct result of not having appropriate plans and resources in place.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is really key to the success of people in these roles, of course, is the senior management environment at these corporations, right? And in a lot of cases, you still got senior management that doesn't reflect the general population. There aren't enough women, there aren't enough people of color. Nikki, I wonder if you can talk about maybe the distinction between places that have done better with overall diversity and then introduce this idea of a DEI officer, and places that still, I guess, are struggling with that concept or just not really embracing it. It seems to me that the likelihood of success is at least in part dependent on how diverse the workplace that you're getting into is in its senior management.
Yeah, and there's so much research out there to support this. McKinsey reports, I mean, all of that. But I just want to kind of dial back a little bit where I think things look different now, if that makes sense. And like if you go on Indeed or any other LinkedIn or any of the platforms where the CDO positions that are embedded in the C-suite, they're kind of brought down a tier, where they might not necessarily be in the C-suite or the S-suite or the V-suite, but that next tier, like a directorship or, but I always say, if you bring it down those tiers, make sure that they are a direct liaison to the S and V suite. So, so it just is looking a little different. I'll say that. And also I'll say too, in the industry's slight defense, now companies are trying to wrangle in this remote work. So everything is shifted to that, where now, employers and companies are like, okay, we're bringing everyone back, and now they're losing people. So it's just this whole, so I think it's shifted to that. Again, I am defending, but I'm not defending the industry. But yeah, it's just, and Mark, I don't know if you can.
If I can just chime in for a second, because all this is a direct result, a lot of factors very briefly. And what we're seeing here in terms of not that the lack of connectivity from the senior management down, in some cases, that employees are beginning to feel alienated. And so even the word DEI, if you use the word diversity inside of an organization, you have some employees they're becoming offended by that word. And because they feel as though the organization has not necessarily embraced it. They may have verbally embraced it, but it has not been socially embraced throughout the entire organization. So it becomes a challenge of how do you make the employees feel that it is important throughout the entire organization. But what's happened over the last 18 months or so is that some employees view it as a divisive strategy and dividing people inside the organization. And that's another challenge that needs to be dealt with as well.
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback what Mark is saying, and what I'm seeing, Stephen, now is the employees are flipping it and holding the ELT teams and senior leadership accountable and calling them out, as we see on, all these different platforms where they're being very vocal. And especially, I'm pro-millennial, so I don't want to seem like I'm an anti, but they're really driving this narrative. Like, you made all these declarations, 2 years ago, Black people, we love you, we stand by you. And some friends that I know personally were given promises. And, like, okay, listen, we are going to sponsor you. We're done with mentorship. We're going to sponsor you. We're going to pour all these resources into you and to prepare you for that next jump that they did not receive.
Yeah. I want to talk just briefly about local and Southeast Michigan. I know, Mark, you work with a lot of local companies, and Nikki, I know you do too. Are we seeing something different here? Something better, maybe, is maybe my hopeful statement there, or are we struggling as much as everybody else? Mark, I'll start with you.
Thank you. I think from my perspective, I am working very heavily in this space. I'm seeing people who are truly not just saying it verbally, they're trying to make a change inside the organization. So I'm sure that outside of that sphere, there may be some other organizations that are grappling with this discussion as we're having this morning. But by the same token, I think the people I'm working with, they get it. They're trying to make a change. We still got a long ways to go, however.
Yeah. And Nikki, what are you finding?
I'm seeing, like I said, it's slowed down a little bit and it looks different. And I have clients literally from coast to coast.
Everywhere,
so
right.
Yeah. And I'm seeing that there are some industries more than others that are, sustaining their commitment. But then, like I said, now things have kind of shifted back to figuring out how they're going to manage all the remote and stop the bleeding from employees with the great resignation they're dealing with as well. So it's a lot of different variables, but I'll say the momentum's there, is just lessened.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Mark Lee, Nikki Pardo. Couldn't have had two better voices to talk about this issue. Thanks so much for joining us on American Black Journal.
Thank you
very much. Appreciate it. Right.
We talk a lot on this show about the challenges faced by minority business owners, and we know that access to capital is a major obstacle for emerging African-American entrepreneurs. The Ebiara Fund was created to help alleviate some of the financial concerns for minority real estate developers here in Detroit. The fund is a collaboration between the Kresge Foundation, the nonprofit Invest Detroit, and consulting firm Imprint. I spoke with two of the fund's partners, Keona Cowan and Rod Hardiman. So let's start with this. The idea behind this fund, I think, is so powerful because it aims directly at a real inequality, a real imbalance in our community. Rod, talk quickly about the Ebiara Fund and how you came up with this idea.
No, so the Ebiara Fund, it comes out of the genesis of being an entrepreneur, running a small business, in particular being a real estate developer, and realizing that the gaps of capital for equity are significant. In Detroit, we have a unique ecosystem. We have great CDFI partners like Invest Detroit who have tried to solve in many ways the debt financing challenges that real estate developers have, but there still remained a solution that was necessary for equity capital. And Ebiara seeks to kind of fill that gap, to provide capital to Black and Brown developers who are doing deals in the city of Detroit who want to grow and scale firms. Let's provide you the tools and the resources and the fuel you need to do that.
Yeah. Kiona, as Rod said, this is a particular problem in Detroit. It looks different here, I think, than it does in other communities. Talk about why it's so important in Detroit.
Well, so as Rod mentioned, it's filling a gap, but it's filling a gap from an affordable perspective. And simply, you think about the state of the city of Detroit and the multi-decades of disinvestment. We certainly need developers like Rod focused on development, access to capital, and housing, retail, everything. We need all of it in our neighborhoods. And without developers like Rod and others that are participating in this program, we wouldn't be able to do it. But one of the things that outside of it being affordable that's unique is there are other funds across the country very much like this. And the uniqueness here is we're partnering with a developer. So you've got the voice from a funding perspective, a lender's perspective, but you also have the voice of a developer who knows exactly what these developers are going through, have experienced it, or is experiencing it. And so that perspective allows us to deliver in a better, different way than other funds because we have a holistic approach to supporting developers, supporting Detroiters, and getting access to capital.
Yeah. Kiona, we've talked for a long time in this community about the problems with lending and the access to capital and the problem on the bank side and the other kinds of people who provide money. Catch us up on where we are with that. I mean, we've seen some movement, I feel like, but we're nowhere near where we should be in terms of, people being able to get a fair shot at getting the funding for projects they want to take on.
Absolutely. So community development financial institutions, or CDFIs like Invest Detroit, are really focused on breaking that barrier, increasing access to capital. But what is also extremely important, and this is a component of this fund as well, is giving that coaching, that not just the technical assistance in order to get access to capital, but these are emerging or startup businesses in a lot of cases. And what they need is help with what they don't know until they're facing the situation. And so that coaching component, well beyond just access to capital, is so important, such that it allows them, one, to survive, right? And then have longevity to it, such that we can lift up more businesses. So I think that's one of the components that has certainly helped us as we continue to reduce that gap and that barrier for access to capital as technical assistance. The other thing is affordable access to capital. Just because you're a startup, just because you're emerging, just because you're learning, doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be expensive. Right. And so what we're working on at Invest Detroit in this particular fund, but in other funds where we're supporting small businesses as well, is how do we make this affordable? How do we utilize foundations and federal funding to reduce interest rates to then also increase that probability and their cash flow such that they can be successful?
Yeah. So, Rod, I want to give you a chance to talk a little about the environment and the experiences from the developer standpoint here in Detroit, and from the African-American developer standpoint. I think for a lot of people, this is a theoretical problem. For you, it's a very everyday practical one. Talk about what that looks like.
Yeah, it's so I think there are real challenges. I mean, I think for any developer, any small business, any startup, access to capital and finding those sources is an everyday thing. When you're Black and brown in the real estate space, those challenges become exponentially greater. And so that's what we fight through every day. Yes, it's the same challenges everyone else faces on cost of construction and escalating, getting through city processes. How do you manage all the compliance necessary and all the environment and the changing political winds that we all have to navigate through the different community spheres. But if you can solve all that, when you're Black and brown, or if you're a Black developer in Detroit, you still got to figure out how to find that capital. And just because you can have $250,000 or $50,000 or $100,000 to put into a deal, that means all you have. So that means you're going to risk your entire net worth, your savings, to try to do something great. And we're trying to say, let's try to remove some of those historic and systemic barriers that have excluded us from the development process. Let's make that a little bit easier. Instead of you having to put up your entire net worth, we'll maybe contribute half of that equity for you. That gives you a different launching pad, a different risk profile. But also what is noticed is change what people think is possible. People are not thinking about one deal at a time, which is what we normally do because that's all the money you have. Now think about 1, 2, 3, 4 deals at a time. Why? Because they see this as a true access to capital that they can touch, they can get. And if the deals make sense, the numbers work, they have a real viable shot.
Yeah. What you were just saying about people having to risk just about everything they have to put a deal together to get it done. I hear that story over and over and over again from small African-American developers in Detroit. And when they talk about those numbers and what they mean to their business and what they mean in terms of, hey, am I ever going to get this back? Hey, how do I go and do the next thing? I mean, there are so many reasons to not do that. There are so many reasons that you would look at it and say, hey, you know what? This isn't worth it. It really does begin to explain the slow pace and the slow growth that we've seen in this sector.
And it also underscores why people are doing it, though. It's because people believe in the long-term viability of the city of Detroit, of Southeastern Michigan, and the state as a whole. And if you believe in the long-term viability, your lens is a little longer. You're not thinking about 1, 2 year, 3 year flip in the single housing perspective. You're thinking about how to rebuild communities and neighborhoods. Neighborhoods take 100 years to develop, right? At times. So how do you put the building blocks in place to allow that thriving to happen? And the wonderful thing about the Ebiara Fund is that we staunchly believe if you empower Black and brown developers, that they're going to be the ones who are going to run into the communities to do those deals, to start reseeding neighborhoods, rebuilding communities, and resupporting them. And we're already seeing that start to happen. And we hope it's going to continuously be a cycle that builds a neighborhood development.
Yeah. Kiana, you mentioned earlier that there are other kind of models for this approach around the country. I wonder if there are other things that you see in other communities that we might be thinking about here as well, in terms of, again, bridging some of these gaps, making it easier for Black and brown developers to participate in the environment here. What else should we be thinking about?
So one of the things that I'm going to say is actually happening in our market is training of emerging or folks that are looking to become developers that are in some realm of real estate as a whole. And so, certainly want to acknowledge partnership in everything that we do. And Capital Impact Partners is another community development financial institution that is really focused on people of color from a developer perspective of lifting them up. And they have a formal training program that is really geared towards creating the platform for the academics of what does it mean to be a developer? How do you analyze the financials, so forth, so on, such that, a number of folks are either architects or contractors or single family home developers and taking it up to the next level and entering into commercial development. And so that's really created a platform for developers to enter into this program or be supported by Invest Detroit's traditional products, right? So there's a training program, they get coaching afterwards, they get access to capital from Capital Impact's perspective, but then also as a partner of ours, We also are financing a number of those developments, trying to assist them as they build their portfolio, build their business. And Rod and I both participate in that program, from a coaching and teaching perspective, sharing our knowledge and experience from the various perspectives. So we live the theory of let somebody light their light from your own or your candle. And so I think that that's a unique component to what we have in the city of Detroit. Again, we're trying to take that holistic approach. Access to capital that helps you build your business, access to capital for your project, coaching, teaching, mentorship. We are really deeply rooted and believe in this. And so we're putting everything behind it in order to support the Black and Brown community as they help us build, a stronger, better Detroit.
That'll do it for us this week. Thanks for watching. And you can find out more about our guests at AmericanBlackJournal.org. And you can connect with us anytime on Facebook and on Twitter. Take care, and we'll see you next time.
From Delta Faucets to Behr Paint, Masco Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. Masco, serving Michigan communities since 1929. Support also provided by the Cynthia and Edsel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV.
The DTE Foundation proudly supports 50 years of American Black Journal in covering African American history, culture, and politics. The DTE Foundation and American Black Journal partners in presenting African American perspectives about our communities and in our world.
Also brought to you by Nissan Foundation and viewers like you. Thank you.